Welcome to a special edition of Derek's Zoo Videos. You all asked, and now I'm here to answer your zoo-related questions. So without any fancy intro, let's just jump right in. First, what is your favorite zoo exhibit and why? I'm not sure if they mean exhibit area or a single habitat, so I'm just gonna go ahead and answer both. Starting with my favorite individual animal exhibit, it's honestly really tough. There's so many good ones out there, but when you factor in my personal connection to it, I have to go with the Savannah at Binder Park. It's absolutely massive, 18 acres with varied terrain and habitat types, and it's literally just a huge valley that the zoo fenced in. I really love the many different viewing areas, starting at the village when you first arrive in Wild Africa, then down to the ground level with the 2 boma huts, and then back up to the elevated walkway again. Also, I can't really think of many other places that include Bontebok, Addax, and Waterbuck in large mixed species exhibits, and certainly not all together, so that adds some uniqueness to the exhibit. Overall, this is what I think of when I think of Binder Park, and why I really recommend everyone to visit there at least once. Moving on to my favorite exhibit complex, it's also tough to choose, but for some context, I generally prefer large areas that are geographically themed with good theming throughout, which is why I love the Columbus Zoo so much, because that's basically the entire zoo there. Bonus points to areas that are unique compared to what you find at most zoos, and that feature a variety of animal types. When I put all of this together, what I came up with was Columbus's Asia Quest. You don't find too many exhibits that feature both Southeast and Northern Asian animals, and because it's Columbus, obviously the habitats and the theming are amazing. Then for the species, you've got your star animals like elephants, tigers, and red pandas, but there's also a bunch of rarities with musk deer, markhors, silvery langurs, and so on. And like I mentioned, it isn't just large animals. Could this be a hint that I'll have an exhibit tour of this area sometime next year? Maybe. Keeping a similar theme, since you made a trip to the Brookfield Zoo, do you have a favorite exhibit or favorite animal from there? I mentioned in my last tour that I really enjoyed the exhibits at Brookfield, not necessarily because they were the best I've ever seen, but because I felt they offered different experiences than what I'm used to. If I had to pick a favorite, it would be Habitat Africa. For a lot of the same reasons that I just praised the Asia Quest, it's overall good quality and very unique compared to other African complexes, especially in terms of species. Obviously there's the pangolin, but also multiple kinds of duikers, klipspringers, dwarf mongooses, and more. However, the animal I enjoyed seeing the most at Brookfield was the echidnas. It had been a long time since I'd seen one after Fort Wayne phased theirs out, and it was super cool to see one so active and not even in a nocturnal exhibit. Also, discovering that one of their echidnas is over 50 and the oldest animal at the zoo was one of my favorite things I've stumbled upon while researching for a tour. Next, what is your favorite individual zoo animal at any zoo? So one that I want to mention, even though I've only seen him once so far, is Posy, the Palace's cat at Potter Park. First of all, I absolutely love this species, but I never had any luck getting good photos or videos of them. But the first time I saw Posy, he was perfectly posing for me, and between my excitement at finally getting some photos of the species and my determination to get as many photos as possible, my arms actually started shaking because I've been holding my camera up for so long. However, like I said, I've only seen him once, so for my top favorite, it's got to be Eliza, the ground hornbill at Binder Park. It certainly helps that I see her a lot being at my home zoo, but I've never met another zoo animal that has so much personality. She's always up at the front of her exhibit with usually something to show you, whether it's a rock, a mouse from her diet, or some poor wild animal that she's managed to catch. Moving on, what animals do US zoo collections lack? Obviously, there's a ton of individual species that we don't have in the US, but for animal types, I can't really think of any that are completely absent or very underrepresented, other than maybe some smaller mammals like rodents, but that's probably the case for zoos worldwide, just because they're not a big draw for the general public. A few other things that came to mind for this question are we don't have any subspecies of leopard other than the Amur leopard, which is why you frequently find Amur leopards in African attractions. Also, macaques or baboons. These days you usually only see Japanese macaques or Hamadryas baboons representing those groups, at least from my experiences. Are you going to check out those 2 zoos in Michigan's Upper Peninsula when summer comes? And they're referring to the Garlyn and DeYoung family zoos. So I have visited the Garlyn Zoo a few times before, although it's been over 10 years now. And it's funny, for those of you that don't know, I spent the last 3.5 years attending Northern Michigan University, and when I started college I was fully expecting to visit the Garlyn Zoo at least once or twice, but almost as soon as I got up there, I started thinking about bigger and better possibilities, which is how I ended up going to Green Bay, Milwaukee, and eventually Minnesota. As of now, I'm not really planning to go to the Garlyn Zoo again, meaning that I wouldn't make a trip just to go there, but it's possible if I have another reason to drive up to the UP, I might stop there. However, even if I do, there's no guarantee you'll see it on my channel. Like, I went to Boulder Ridge again last summer specifically to see their new Javan langurs and pygmy hippos, but I didn't actually film anything for the channel. For a privately owned zoo though, I do think the Garlyn Zoo is pretty decent, so I would recommend checking it out if you're ever in the area. As for the DeYoung family zoo, I've seen some interesting things about that zoo online, so I don't plan on going there. Alright, what is the rarest species you've seen? In terms of the rarest zoo animals I've seen, the 2 that I thought of first were the bear cuscus at Memphis and the white-bellied pangolin at Brookfield, both of which I believe are currently the only of their kind displayed in the country. Now if we're talking the species with the lowest total population, I have seen a few species that are or were classified as extinct in the wild, but actually have higher captive populations. So unless I'm overlooking something, it would have to be the Sumatran rhino, with less than 100 remaining. Playing off of that, my fellow zootuber Jacob asked, are there any rare animals that you want to see in more zoos? Honestly, all of them. Any animal that is either rare in the wild or just rare in zoos would be a treat to see more often. Even though I just mentioned one of these in the last question, to keep it on brand for me, it would have to be Sumatran or Javan rhinos. But since I doubt we'll ever see either of those in a zoo again, I'll go with something a little more realistic that I also ironically just mentioned, but I'd love to see more zoos display pangolins. Next, a fun one. If you were to be an animal at a zoo, what animal and at what zoo? Let's see. I don't like cold weather, I like to nap a lot, I also don't like waking up in the morning, if I'm not going to a zoo that day of course. So let's go with an armadillo. As for what zoo, I'll go with the Potawatomi Zoo. I really like this next one. What animal was the hardest to take a photo of? Usually the design of the exhibit, the lighting, and stuff like that is what makes it easier or harder to get good photos. But as for what species was challenging because of the animal itself, it would have to be wolverines. I see them most frequently at the Detroit Zoo, and I have gotten a few really nice photos, but each one has been a challenge since the wolverines seem to only pause for a second at a time once they start moving, and I've yet to have any luck getting photos of them at any other zoo. Another good one, how do you get the best experience at a zoo? So obviously my goals for a zoo visit are very different from the average zoo goer, but some things I recommend are trying to be at the zoo either in the first or last hour they are open. Animals are often most active when they first go on exhibit for the day, or when they're antsy to go in for the night. This is especially true for carnivores, so if you're arriving early, try to prioritize seeing things like bears and big cats first. Animals like primates, birds, and hoofstock are much more likely to be active throughout the entire day. It's also never a bad idea to visit during cooler weather when possible. Early spring and fall are great times for zoo visits. Not only will there probably be less crowds than in the summer, but the animals will probably be more active overall. Finally, something that may annoy your companions, but has paid off for me over the years, is to always be persistent. If there's an animal you really want to see, the amount of times I've finally seen an animal moving around at the very end of a visit, on my third or fourth time past that exhibit, is a lot. Piggybacking off of that, the same person wanted to know, how much time should you dedicate to a zoo for a visit? So this is going to depend a lot on what your goals are for the visit and how large the zoo you're visiting is. If your goal is to simply see the entire zoo once and have a good time, then a small zoo like Potter Park could be comfortably seen in an hour, whereas larger parks could take between 3 to 5 hours. However, if you're like me and you're planning to see multiple areas twice while filming 2 or 3 videos, then expect to add an hour or 2 to that total. Next, what was the first zoo you visited as a kid, or maybe you want to pursue this career? So if you've seen my tours of this zoo, you would already know this, but I visited Binder Park all the time growing up. My mom used to take my brother and I as frequently as once a week when we were little. But I do also want to mention the Fort Wayne Children's Zoo and the Toledo Zoo and Aquarium, both of which I started visiting regularly from a young age, and I think they both played a big role in developing my love for zoos as well. For the second part of the question, I think they're asking if I'm interested in being a full-time YouTuber, and no, that's not really the plan. This is just a hobby for me. However, if they're asking if I want to have a career working at a zoo, the answer is yes. I am currently trying to pursue that career. And the final question, if you could add one species to any zoo, what would it be and to what zoo? I answered in the first question that Binder Park Savannah is my favorite zoo habitat, and for those that don't already know, my favorite animal is rhinos, specifically white rhinos. So if you put the two together, I've always thought it would be incredible to have a small crash of white rhinos on that savanna. I did actually mention this idea to a keeper once, and they correctly pointed out that you'd have to redo the entire fencing to hold rhinos, which would be very expensive, so I doubt that'll ever happen. However, I would love to see rhinos added to Binder Park in some other way, and fun fact, rhinos were supposed to be part of Wild Africa originally, but got cut. The zoo was again rumored to be getting rhinos in the mid-2000s, which didn't end up happening either, but maybe it will someday. And that does it for the questions. But for those of you that are still with me, here's a look at my 2024 plans. I've been making videos for 2 years now, and this is only the second one I've made that wasn't a highlights package or an exhibit tour. But in 2024, that's going to change. Most of the videos will still be those 2 formats, but I also have a few ideas for new top 10 lists, so expect to see one of those within the next couple months. In addition, sometime later next year, I will be introducing a new series where I will give my top reasons why I recommend visiting a particular zoo. This series, at least to start, will focus on shining the spotlight on some of the Midwest smaller parks that people may be less familiar with, which is something my channel's been about from the start. As for the videos you're used to, it'll be mostly exhibit tours for the first few months, which I know you all prefer anyway. In January, we'll make a bittersweet return to Memphis and have our first tour at the Minnesota Zoo. Then, since International Polar Bear Day is celebrated on February 27th, I thought it would be appropriate to feature back-to-back tours starring polar bears for that month. Finally, what can you expect as far as new zoos for the channel in 2024? I will give away that I am considering making what is really a long overdue first visit to the wilds in Ohio at some point next year. Other than that, I don't want to give anything away for now, but I will tease that I have a major trip planned for around March, which will feature multiple zoos we've yet to see on this channel. Thank you for watching.